we underestimate just how encoded in our habits, in our family formation, our values and beliefs are. So all the way back to the Middle Ages, Britain had very low levels of child marriage. It had almost non-existent levels of cousin marriage, especially among the general population, because it was prohibited by the first Archbishop of Canterbury and then ratified by the Catholic Church in the 13th century. And the law was only repealed because Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church, because I think it was Anne Boleyn, who was the cousin of Catherine of Aragon, and obviously wanted to divorce his first wife and marry his second. But even though the law was lifted, it was never common practice among the general population. So what you got was marriage between families, siblings, breaking off and establishing new farm leaseholdings across the country. And so you had an internally migratory population with very low levels of familial intermarriage. And this was the foundation for the nuclear family, and then individualism, and then liberalism. So this is why the English think of ourselves as individualistic, think of ourselves as liberal. Why when we meet someone of a different ethnicity or even background, like your Uber driver, John, or the Catholic Nigerian priest that leads my congregation, or Christian Indians that I've met before, we sort of take people as we meet them, and we can kind of get along with them. Whereas in other parts of the world, the family, the clan, the religion, or in Islam's case, the ummah, carries a lot more weight. Morality is only extended to those with whom you have a common identity. It's not universal. And so, whereas we think universally, the rest of the world does not. And so this is why it's allowed us to think ourselves into believing the rest of the world acts and thinks exactly like us. There are just these arbitrary geographical, economic, and cultural differences that stand in the way that could be easily repealed. And this is why what you're seeing now, I think, and better writers than me have written about this, Patrick Deneen, Yoram Hazony, and the like, is a contest between the Christian worldview that built the West and liberalism. Liberalism proper, by the way, not an aberration of liberalism, not liberalism having gone too far, but liberalism at its root. Because what liberalism in the Lockean and Rousseauian view believed is that all human beings are blank slates, that fundamentally, before civilization was rationally organized according to a social contract, before the first man committed the sin of picking up a rock and saying, "This is mine," and introduced into inequality into the world with private property, all human beings were walking around a Garden of Eden in a state of perfect freedom and perfect equality. And it's only since the creation of civilization that we are not equal. This is why you hear left-wingers whose paramount virtue is equality say that you are a threat to democracy if you are a populist, because populists are noticing differences between groups of people. They are putting one group's interests above the other, and so they are against equality and therefore against democracy. Because if you were for democracy and you believe that everyone is a blank slate, everyone would just be voting for the same thing anyway, because it's all in our rational self-interest. This is completely contrasted to the Christian view of the West, where it says that, yes, all human beings have inviolable dignity if they are innocent, because we are made in the image of God. We are all universally capable of moral dignity, and what matters is not the fact that you have this egalitarian nature, but it's actually your individual acts of virtue that liberal proceduralism can't just throw away and outsource to international laws or neutral institutions. And it recognizes that per the Tower of Babel, per the Acts of the Apostles, God made people in different fashions. We have different cultures. We have different preferences. We were scattered across the globe and act in different ways. And we all have different paths of coming to objective truth. And it seems that the Christian West, given its peace and prosperity compared to the rest of the world, had that path to truth in the least amount of zigzags, let's put it that way. And I think what's happening now is, in retaliation to that totalitarian liberalism that demands that you can't have a preference for your people, your nation, your history, your identity, and demands that you apply a culture-blind practice to immigration, which then ends up importing third world tribalism, then destroys liberalism and all the givens upon which it rests. You're seeing a lot of young men, like me, like the young men that voted for Donald Trump, frankly, like some of the Aussies that I met when I came over for CPAC last month, who are reverting not just to tradition, who are not just celebrating their national identity, but are actually returning to church. And that's why at Easter, 40% of the catechumens in both France and Britain, those joining the Catholic Church, being baptized for the first time, were young men under the age of 30. Catholics are now outnumbering Anglicans, who have become that sort of quietist, self-effacing liberal Christianity that you pointed out, John. They're outnumbering them 2-1, and that's not just due to the famous Catholic birth rate. I think what's happening is you're seeing, in contrast to the virulent, violent, often, tribalism of imported communities in Britain and across the West, and in response to the supposedly value-neutral liberalism that instead makes our history, heritage, and young, ambitious, straight white men public enemy number one of wokeness, you're seeing a rejuvenation of consciousness in Christianity, in national identity, in faith, community, and country. And I think that's the only way we get out of this.